spotlight Stephen, and let's
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Santa Monica Windjammers Race Committee offering of the Intro Start Clinic. This is something that we've been doing for the last 6 years. This is our seventh year, and it's been such a successful event. Actually, it was one of the events that welcomed me into the club. It got me interested in to realize what a great terrific club it is, and it's hosted by Greg Rutter, one of our race committee members and one of our PROs for the club. So what you'll be seeing is a presentation of do's and don'ts of starting. He's going to take you through a whole bunch of things that you want to know, how you want to prepare yourself, and just a little bit about a background. For what we're going to be doing here. If you haven't done Zoom before, please realize that you're actually all being muted right now. So if you do want to actually ask a question, if you look down at the bottom, right in the middle of your screen, you'll see a chat box. If you just click on that chat box, you can actually enter in a question. We have Denise George, who is our chat moderator, so she'll be taking in your questions, and so that she'll be basically having them available for Greg Rutter and our guests, one of our guest speakers, who's Eric Champagne. So just a little bit about that. Make sure we're all practicing good Zoom etiquette and that kind of thing. And then as far as our presenters, Greg Rutter is going to be taking us through most of this. And Greg, just to let you know, Greg started sailing when he was 10 years old. He was a college sailing member of a sailing team with over 1,400 keelboat starts to his credit. He's been the Commodore of SMWYC, South Bay Yacht Racing Association. And he's regularly on the podium with various boats in both Marina Del Rey and in Seattle over the last 18 years in Puget Sound sailing. He's had championships in numerous different classes. And we're really fortunate to have Greg as part of our team. Eric Champagne grew up sailing in Southern California from the time he was born. He holds several world and national titles, as well as many offshore and match racing wins. Currently, he spends time on Etchells and J70 fleets, managing and campaigning those boats around the globe. Eric is a pro sailor. Eric's been a winner in the Etchell class, as well as multiple Transpac wins, Pacific Cup overall winner, Coastal Cup overall winner 2 times, Lipton Cup winner 5 times, Etchell Nationals winner, Etchell's North American winner, runner-up for Melge's 24 Worlds, Congressional Cup winner, and Argo Bermuda Gold Cup winner, Morgan Cup team race winner, Martin 242 North American winner, Sailing Cup winner, and Melge's 22 Russian Nationals winner in Italy. Also, Eric writes for Sailing World magazine, and he's probably going to be putting in the chat a way to kind of communicate with him and connect with him. And he's a person who's got a tremendous amount of knowledge, and so we want to welcome him for that. So I'd like to take this time to welcome everybody to our presentation for the Intro Start Clinic, and I would like to now introduce our host and our moderator, who's Greg Rutter. Please take it away, Greg.
Well, thank you, Stephen. Thank you for for that introduction. I'm Greg Rutter, and going to be presenting with Eric Champagne. Let's go ahead and jump right into this. I don't have any other preamble other than if everyone would be kind enough to just be aware of background noise if your microphone is on. Just, if you could keep it on mute if anything starts getting noisy on your end, I sure appreciate it. Also, maybe telephone ringers, if you can turn those off, that'd be great. Let's get into it. When you get to the start line, do you feel like this, or do you feel like this? What we're going to try to do is get you feeling like a launched dolphin. To get a good start, there are a number of parts to it. You'll notice that starts is the second to last thing in this list. Getting a good start starts really early. Need prep at the dock. You really need to know the rules. You need to know the flags and get your boat ready to go on water. Then you start into the stuff about start sequence and actually starting the race. And we'll finish up talking about things to watch out for. So good prep at the dock. If you get out early and you get your boat ready, you're going to have a good race. There is nothing worse than getting out there and finding out that you're going to your first spinnaker set and find out that your spinnaker sheet is tangled through the lifelines. Don't want to do that. First thing is make sure your boat's registered. I've lost a major trophy by a skipper forgetting to register. always, always, always have sailing instructions and a course chart aboard. If you're new to sailing, you can be a hero by always having SIs and a course chart. I guarantee you, there's going to be a day when the skipper and the tactician forget, and you will be a hero if you have the sailing instructions. Same thing with the order of starts and the class flags, and check the host club for last-minute sailing instruction changes. Again, if the race committee is allowed to make changes up until typically about 9 or 10 o'clock on race day, so be sure to check for that. Know what the courses could be and put them into GPS if you have one. Be sure to know the race radio frequency. Often the race committee will give you valuable information about what's going on with the race, but if you're not in the freak, you're not going to hear it. Again, of course, get a weather forecast. Be clear on what kind of what you're sailing into. Get your boat rigged and check everything twice. Make sure you have the right sails on board. A couple of things that people often forget is to assign clearly assigned crew positions. And a couple of things often forgotten are to have 2 people with watches timing the starts, and to have some people spotting the important parts of the race, including boats that you're competing against, and being able to spot the line, be able to see the pin and the signal boat. So at some point, you have to, as a crew, to decide that you're going to get your heads in the game. Go into race mode. And what I mean by that is stop talking about coronavirus and stop talking about politics and stop talking about entertainment and start talking about the race. Start looking at your competitors, see who's driving, see who your competitors have as tactician, crew. Look at the sea state, but be focused on the race, not on everything else. The rules. This is something especially for people who are starting. No offense to the cruising class, but it's a place I think that you'll see that there's a lot of confusion about what the rules are. So definitely learn the rules. Take the time. Buy a copy of the Racing Rules of Sailing for the current years. When I was first really trying to get into the rules, I put a copy in the bathroom. Too much information, but it's a great short read, but you need to get through it, and it makes my brain turn to mush. So I can only take them one rule at a time, but do learn the racing rules. The basic rules to know for starts are under when boats meet, which are rules 10 through 16, and the starting rules. Rule 26 governs the start, and rule 27. To really get your head around that, if you're not really familiar with the rules, making a small investment in Dave Perry's book, Understanding the Racing Rules of Sailing. He puts it out every 4 years in tandem with the updated racing rules. So they have great illustrations. He has very clear and approachable or an understandable description of especially the key rules like Rule 18 that are long or confusing. Avoid contact. That's Rule 14. And you can see these boats had a little bit of a problem. At the start line, that's when you're at most at risk of collisions. So you are obligated to avoid contact, even if you are absolutely convinced you're in the right. Even if you are in the right, and you need to avoid contact if it's clear that someone else is not going to give you the rights that you deserve, so that you have. So avoid contact. It's a good thing to do. There's a couple of rules that happen that are probably the 2 most important at the start line are port starboard, windward leeward, and the concept of barging. Now, barging does not really exist in the racing rules, but it's a common expression. And the next slide, I'll get into that. But Rule 10 is on opposite tacks. Clearly, starboard tack has right of way. Rule 11 is on tack, on the same tack and overlapped. And this is where barging happens. And let's take a look. Good example. Green boat, which is marked at the bottom center as leeward 1, you'll notice that the boat is close hauled and is on a direct line to the stern of the committee boat for a nice weather in start. The red boat marked windward 1 at the first position is trying to stick his nose in there and get some room. As long as the green boat, leeward 1, is close hauled, she has all the rights in the world. And ideally, at position 1, if you find that you have someone coming down from weather at this, and you're in this position, tell them early. Tell them no room, get out of there. and hold your course. If you really, as you start getting to position 2 and you find that they're just not bearing off, they're just going to go in there, give them the room. Do not have a collision, but loudly yell protest, pull out your red flag. And the nice thing is you have a whole committee boat full of officials that are going to see this person trying to barge in there, and you'll have a lot of witnesses. So, but that's the ideal way just to get them to bail out and make Windward 1 go away. So what's up with the flags? If you see this, you know that there's something's going on. I think all the flags got wet because you'd never see all these flags. But these are the flags you do need to know. On this slide, there are 49 of them. You need to know about 47 of them for sure. And it takes a little bit, but if you're not familiar with all the signal flags, start working on it. It pays dividends as you race. Different regattas will use different combinations of flags to explain who is, what's going on, where you are in the sequence, who is starting. Sometimes you'll be out to the start line late, and if you know these flags, you'll know what's going on and how much trouble you're in. These are the flags to know well. The first flag, L, Lima, will be up typically it means come within hail. It means come over to the boat displaying it. Typically, it will be the race committee's signal boat. And typically, it's for a check-in, but they also may have last-minute instructions that you need to have to start the race. The second flag on the left is P, Papa. That's your preparatory flag. We'll go into when it comes up and when it comes down. But when you see that up, you are in sequence. So, or at least that class is in sequence. So it lets you know. It's very helpful, especially if you bumped your watch and you need to find out how much time you have left. The bottom left flag is the answering pennant. We also call it the cat in the hat. This flag is used for postponements. It is the race committee's way to bail out of a start. They may use it at any time. It is put up with 2 horns. Good flag to know. I've had a number of races where we've had a reason to stop the start sequence. Put the flag up, hit 2 horns, and somebody is charging the line at would have been the go time, and they look kind of stupid because we have to go on the radio and say, "Could you please come back? You're not starting." Once the race has started, we're going to go to the right side of the screen, go to the X flag. This means that someone was over early. This is where your spotters come in. If your spotters see this flag go up, especially if you think that your bowman says, "I don't know, we may have been over early," it may be you. The race committee may, but is not obligated to tell you on the radio. So race starts are pretty much, all starts are by rule run by the flags. Any kind of horns or radio hails are purely discretionary. The flags rule the race. So if the X flag goes up or any of these flags are up, they're running the timing and what's happening with the race. If you see the general recall, no, that's not Greg Rudder flag. That is the general recall flag. It's the first repeats pennant. Oops, sorry about that. And it means everybody come back and we're going to try this again. I've used this exactly once in the Women on the Water, Woman at the Helm, Martin 242 class. 6.5 out of 7 boats were over the line early. So it can happen. So preparation, get out to your boat early. Start and get out on the water early. Take a look at the wind, look at the sea. Like how bumpy is it? This will have be very close to the time that, or correction, the sea state and the wind are going to have a lot to do with your sail selection and with your sail settings. So get out there and take a look early. Start a wind log. Have 3 columns of time, velocity, and direction, and try to get it every 5 to 10 minutes. And keep that chart. Maybe you can have one of your spotters keep that log for you. If a tactician is aboard and that's all they are, tactician, they often will keep that log, but you may want to assign that to someone. But it's great to know what the wind is doing throughout the race day. Again, advantage of being out early is you can practice tacks, jibes, you get your sets and your douses. Again, this is the place you're going to find when you have a twisted kite or a tangled line of some sort. That pre-start is the time to find that, shake it out, get it reset, and so forth. Check-in, some races require it, some do not. but you can be disqualified if a check-in is required, so look for the Lima flag. And when the line is set, take time, run the line, run parallel to the line from the signal boat into the pin or vice versa. Have your bowman get the magnetic direction and take land sights on, or whatever sights you can get on shore beyond each the pin and the signal boat. It's worth getting the time of how long it takes to run the line. That's really helpful in setting yourself up. We'll talk about this in a little bit, but it helps you set up on how long it takes you. So it helps you get set up on where you're going to actually start with part of the line. Sail selection. Your weather forecast is going to tell you what kind of sails you need. Don't want to go out there without your number 3 if it's a breezy day. Try to set your leads, get your backstay, look for power at the start. So you go into your power settings. I'm not going to belabor that right now, but you do want to have a power setting and of course set for the wind velocity and sea state. And after you start, you can then adjust your sails for speed and point. I think Eric will have more to talk about that in a bit. Before you start, as a courtesy and as a matter of rule, please stay out of the start box. And we'll define start box in a little bit, but please stay out of the start box. There's nothing worse than to be, especially bigger boats, trying to get maneuvering, but in the last, say, 2 minutes and have somebody else kind of wallowing through your start box. And I've almost had a couple of collisions. I think most people have. So please, just a matter of courtesy, stay out of the start box. What you can do, though, is get out to the weather side of the signal boat. It's a great place to watch the starts ahead of you, to see what side of the line they choose, and to see where they go, which side of the course they want after they start. So, you're out of their way, out of the starting fleet's way before their start. Work with your bowman and your jib people, especially your active jib trimmer, who can see forward and leeward of the boat. That's kind of a blind spot. It gets forgotten a lot. The trimmers often get their heads in the sail, and they aren't really looking underneath to see oncoming traffic, especially before the start. It's busy, so be sure to get your have your bowman and a jib trimmer taking a look, and have some hand signals for your bowman. Up, come down. Watch out, we're having a collision, something. Sorry about that, guys. I apologize for that. So as you're going into sequence, you need to know when you start. The sailing instructions will specify when this race is to start. Typically, you get some wake-up horns about 1 minute before the start sequence actually begins. When your first warning horn and flag go up, be sure to get the course. Yes, I have been in a race in the lead, and we look at each other and say, What's our weather mark? Which course are we on? Don't be like us. Also look for an AP flag, the cat in the hat. Nothing more embarrassing than to start when there's no start. Something else to be told that you'll know in the sailing instructions is whether you have a rolling 5-minute start. That means that the start signal for one class is the warning signal for the subsequent class. Sometimes they also put 1 minute in between sequences, so be clear on that. Again, run and time the line, so you know how long it takes you to get from one end to the other. Rules 26 start sequence. I'm not going to go through this. I just want to see that you'll typically at 6 minutes before your start, you'll have multiple horns. This is doesn't always happen, but most race committees will give you some horns. Just say, hey, we're coming up on your 5 minute. At 5 minutes, your class and course flags will go up. At 4 minutes, you'll have a preparatory flag. At 1 minute, your preparatory flag comes down, and at go time, the flags are down, and if there's a subsequent class, the subsequent class flags will come up. The nice thing about having the preparatory flag up is you know that you're less than 4 minutes and more than 1 minute from your start. So again, if your watch gets bumped and you're not sure where you are, you can at least watch the flags. Once you're in sequence, you need to determine the favorite into the line. Eric is going to cover that for us. Watch if there's fleets before you, do watch where the preceding fleets are going, which side of the course they're taking. Watch your fleet, see if there's a side that they want. You may see that everybody's bunching up at one end or the other, or you can see people hanging out really tightly circling either the signal boat or the pin end. That'll tell you that there's going to be a crowd there, certainly. Key thing here is not to always nail the end that's the most favored, but to find a lane of air with clear air, and it's air that you can keep. So again, we'll talk a little bit more about this, but you're looking for that open spot that it's better to be going fast in clear air than to be on the favored end of the line in a crowd with a bunch of dirty air. A point for trimmers is always, always, always be ready to maneuver. You can't, the start sequence is not the time to set it and forget it. Things happen really fast, so you need to have your sheets in your hands, be listening to the skipper or tactician that they're going to come up, fall off, and also kill speed. So that's stuff you can practice on how to do all those maneuvers. Critical thing is to make sure the boat is moving full speed at the gun. Eric, can you take us through which end?
Absolutely. So there's two very general accepted ways to find the favorite end of a start line. One is very simple, one is quite a bit more complicated. The simple one, which if you're in a Martin or anything like that, super easy. If you can go to the next slide, Greg, and thank you, Greg, for introducing me. Very, very simple and very easy. You go to the middle of the line and you go head to wind, right in the middle of the line, right where number 1 is. And if you are head to wind and your bow is facing closer to the committee boat, the wind is coming from the committee boat side and therefore the committee boat is favored. And if your bow is pointing a little more to the pin when you're head to wind, the wind is coming a little bit more from the pin end, making the pin end favored. And it's that simple. Another way to do it, doing the exact same thing, which is what I like to do, is over in position 2. I like to be below the line, go head to wind, and coast head to wind until I can sight through the pin to the committee boat. And if the committee boat is to the right of a beam to my boat, I know that the pin end is favored, higher on the course, and vice versa. If the committee boat is to the left of my beam, I know that the committee boat is higher on the course and thus favored. This slide, this is a bit more complicated, a little bit more math, but it gives you a very accurate number to how far the committee boat or the pin end may be favored. What we do is we sail on port outside the line, lining up the pin and the committee boat, and we get a heading. In our example here, that number is 340. When we do the math in our head, 340 on the line minus 90 is 250. We know that now that 250, if the wind was at 250, the line would be square. So then, and we can do this anywhere part, we can go head to wind. In our example here, we go head to wind, and the true wind or heading as we're luffing is 265. We know that 250 would have been square, but the wind's at 265. So we know that the wind is 15 degrees to the right of square to the line. Therefore, the committee boat is 15 degrees favored. Back to you, Greg.
Oh, I thought you were going to do this.
Oh.
All right.
We have a question.
Yes, Denise.
Greg or Eric, is 15 degrees egregiously favored? And would you say you have to be at the committee boat at 15 degrees? Or is there a degree where you would say clear air is much more, is a better situation than, being on that side of the line?
For me, it mainly depends on how long the start line is. If it's a really long start, that 15 degrees equals multiple boat lengths. And so I think it would be very important to take 15 degrees of line bias on a very long start line. On the other hand, if the line's very short and it's only a half a boat length gain, I think like Greg said earlier, being in clean air and having the ability to go to the side of the course that you previously have deemed better is a better benefit.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Eric. So if the pin is favored, and we do have, to Eric's point, we do have a graphic coming up that'll illustrate that. But if a pin is favored, or you want the left side of the course, perhaps you see more pressure out there, you may want to start at the pin. If you have a low handicap boat and you just don't care about, you just want clear air and don't care if you're fast, you don't think boats are going to go roll over the top of you, or if you have a boat that doesn't point that well, pin end is a good thing because you can sorry, you can just foot off and get your speed up and keep going. Overall, look for the favored end, find the side of the course you want, and look for clear air you can keep. And I say avoid a crowd. As Eric was pointing out, it's a trade-off. Illustration of the pin end favored. This is something that race committees will do to protect the signal boat, is to simply deliberately put the pin favored, and that tends to get a lot of the fleet away from the signal boat. In this case, it's favored by 15 degrees and a 300-foot line, which is pretty typical for what we see in Marina del Rey. It'll give you an 81-foot advantage. And Eric pointed out that that's multiple boat lengths, so it's a definite plus. But everybody recognizes that, and you're going to have, again, a lot of boats, probably a lot of yelling, and some dirty air. So something that you just have to decision you have to make. When you're in sequence, stay inside the start box. Start box is defined as the ley lines. The two green ley lines on this graphic are for starboard tack. There are also port ley lines. I did not put them in because it made the drawing really messy. But try to stay inside the start box. If you find that the boat, in this case, the length of the line will take you about a minute to run it, by knowing that, it helps you, gives you some markers on the course to figure out where you are, how long it'll take you to get to your preferred starting point. So that's why timing the line is so important. Bruce Cooper had mentioned, something I got from Bruce, is rule of thumb, 1 boat length per minute of time before your start. Come back next week where Bruce and Eric will be able to discuss this in more in detail. I took Bruce to mean that that's really a rule of thumb. It's a good one, that you don't want to drift away from the start line. The wind is typically coming towards the start line and pushing you away from it, and you tend to get kind of deep on that, and you've got to make any distance back to weather that you get pushed to leeward. So try to stay inside the box. The other thing is, I'm just going to bring the cursor over to the right-hand side. If you get too far outside the committee boat, the signal boat, you'll find that another boat will say, hey, there's an opportunity behind me. They will come to the starboard ley line and keep you from starting, doubling back and starting. They'll either push you down the line, or you might find yourself committing a barging offense, rule 11 offense. So try to stay inside the box. If you go outside the box, have a good reason for it. So anticipate where you want to be. Figure out where you want to be. In this example, the skippers decided the middle of the line is a place they want to start. If you're not used to starting, middle of the line is just fine. You're going to be as far from the crowd as you can be. It also gives you a lot of slack that if you find yourself a little early or a little late, you've still got start line to work with. So again, this is where timing the line and knowing how long it takes your boat to turn and reaccelerate. Remember that when you turn, the harder you turn, the more speed you lose. So you have to get that speed back up, and you want to be going full speed when the start gun goes off. So this is something that I've actually been aboard with skippers who really are reluctant to get into the parade, as we call it. It's just kind of crowded. They're not comfortable with handling the boat in a crowd, and they don't want to get in there. But get in the mix. You have to do it at some point. And in the 5 minutes that you have for your start sequence, it really helps you get a good feel for how fast you are compared to your competitors, how long it takes you to get from end to end, how crowded things are going to be. It also allows you a chance to get a little separation from other boats, so you can get a spot, a nice clear spot and clear air that you can keep after the start gun goes off. And Denise, are there any other questions at this point?
There aren't, but I actually had a question maybe for
please.
Eric. Eric, there are different ways to approach the start line, or in different situations how you might, I don't know if you're going to cover this or not, Greg, but let's say the pin's favored. Would you do this parade if the pin was favored? Or would you do this parade if the boat was favored, or would you change that up at all?
For me, if the committee boat was favored, I don't mind being in the parade. It's all about, like Greg said, your time and your distance and knowing how long it's going to take to get from point A to point B back to the line. So you just need to know when to exit the parade. For a pin-in start, it's a little bit trickier. It's often crowded. Being the leeward boat is often favorable because you have some rights. Being the leeward boat, as long as you can make the pin-in. So for pin-in starts, usually do it a little different and hang out doing circles or loops out under the pin, waiting for the proper time to come in from the pin side of the line.
Got it. Thank you.
Eric, would that also include if you choose to do a port tack start?
For sure, if you want to do a port tack start, doing circles outside to the left of the pin is really the only way to get there. Doing the circles out there and then finding the right time to exit the circle so that you can hit the pin at full speed on port. And that is not something I personally recommend almost ever. It's very rare that'll work. But if you do it, you need to make sure you're absolutely at full speed. You're as close to the pin as you can be. So often coming in very slightly reaching at the pin is favored. And then having, like you said earlier, Greg, having a spotter, having somebody calling traffic, and being very sure that you're crossing anybody on starboard.
Great. And we've got a graphic of that coming up just a little bit, and Eric can talk a little bit more about it when we get there.
I got a question.
Yes.
Yeah. You probably cover this later, but the advantage and disadvantage of starting your run to the line on port, getting right up to the line in a hole, tacking, and then, so the advantage and disadvantage, and then how to defend against that if you're the starboard boat.
Eric, do you have a thought for that?
Yeah, in terms of the port boat, if you go all the way up to the line and tack, most people in the loop, that Greg had put up earlier, most people are doing that loop where they're a few boat lengths off the start line. So if you're on port and you go up to the line and tack, there's going to be somebody on starboard below you with leeward right away. So for me, that's a very risky start. I don't mind being the port boat, tacking into a hole, 5 or 6 boat lengths below the start. Say you have 30, 40 seconds to the start or 20 seconds. Being below the line rather than on the line when you tack onto starboard. That way you have room to head up without being over, and you also have room to bear away if somebody on starboard behind you is trying to reach below you.
And Eric, maybe this is a good time to talk quickly about if you're coming from port tack and then you turn on to starboard tack as the leeward boat. When do you get rights to the luffing rights on the boat to weather of you?
So you, I believe, have technically completed your tack when you've reached a close hauled course by the rule book. So if you are on port and you are tacking to leeward of somebody, you basically need to fill your sails to prove that you're on starboard. And then once you're on starboard and leeward, you now have right of way and you can luff. But the only caveat is you have to give the boat above you room to avoid. So if you come out of port onto starboard, your sails fill, but the second they fill, you're within a foot of the boat above you, and you head up, you instantly cause contact. You didn't give them enough room to avoid. So you need a little bit of a gap, a quarter length gap between the two boats when you get onto starboard so that the weather boat has time to avoid you.
Great. Thank you for that. We're going to highlight three different types of starts, the timed or Vanderbilt start, port approach, and a port tack start that Eric has just said that he likes so much. A timed or Vanderbilt start. It's great for larger boats. It does require some practice, but in this example, we've got starting a run at approximately 2.5 minutes to start. You simply crack off onto a broad reach and run for about 1 minute downhill. In this example, we're saying it takes about 20 seconds to get a boat to turn and come back up to where the sails are full and working for you. Then another minute. Somewhere about there, you see there's about a 10 or second gap in there. Be aware that when you're going downhill on a broad reach, your boat's at its most efficient point of sail, it's going to accelerate quite fast. When you turn, you burn off a lot of speed, and then you've got to come back up into the wind. So it will take you a little longer to get back to the start line. So again, you need to practice this, but these are the basic mechanics. As I said, it takes practice. If you can come right up on, make your turn and come right up onto to the hip of the signal boat, you are close hauled, you'll have be the weather boat with rights, and that keeps people from coming in from weather of you. You got to be close hauled. Wind shifts and wind velocity changes can make you early or late, so you have to sort of be prepared for that. But heavier boats does give them time to accelerate. If you're short on crew and you can't be doing a lot of maneuvering, it's a definite benefit. But do watch out for leeward boats coming in from your left-hand side and coming up underneath you. Once they are close hauled, they will have some rights and they can take you up. Port approach. This is probably the most common. Eric, would you like to talk about coming in this way from the port side and then coming underneath boats, making a hole?
For sure. It's a very common approach, the green line. The nice thing about coming in on port is you can see all the starboard boats. And like Greg said, you can find or pick a hole, a gap between the boats. And the benefit of being in a big hole is you have room below you to build speed, you have clean air and all that. So as we're sailing along on port on green, we'll scan, especially in big fleets, we'll scan the fleet and we'll find a big gap between starboard boats, and we'll tack there closer to leeward, closer to the weather boat, so that we have a big gap to leeward. It's mostly about having a big gap to leeward. So at 10 seconds before the start, 15 seconds, whatever it takes your boat to accelerate, you have that time and room to put the bow down and start accelerating.
Eric, can you...
We have a question.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Marcy asks, can you explain more about not being allowed to head up? What if the boat behind is clear astern in the Vanderbilt?
In the Vanderbilt. Just to be clear, the question is, if there's a boat clear astern approaching a start line?
The slide said it was barging.
So if there's no overlap.
Yeah, if there's no overlap, until there's overlap, there's the boat that's clear ahead has rights. Once there's overlap, the leeward boat has rights.
She said it's bullet point 3 on the previous slide.
Well, let's go find out what that says. Oops, sorry about that.
1, 2.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's simply that if you look at blue boat number 2, actually, let me back up just a little bit. Yeah, as long as you're coming in close hauled, you have rights over boats to weather of you. If there is a boat that comes in from your left-hand side on starboard tack, that would be to leeward of the boat with the red sails in this example. Yes, the boat that comes in from leeward can take up the weather boat. That right to do that shuts off when the boat to weather can no longer bear off and clear the committee boat. At some point, you can simply say, the boat that is to weather, without, if they can't make a seaman-like turn without a collision, okay, if any time before a collision would be close, yes, the boat to weather must give way, must bail out of there. A boat to leeward can take them up. But at some point, it becomes dangerous to try to turn the boat, and there's a collision with the signal, an imminent collision with the signal boat. You'll probably get away with it. That's my opinion. It's a safety thing. So at the point the weather boat can no longer safely turn away, that's when they don't have to give up, and they don't have to get out of there. You don't want to have a collision. So did that answer the question? I hope. Port approach. Eric, do you want to take this one or shall I? All right, so this is just finishing up, coming in on port. It's this slide here.
Okay, we have a question here.
Okay, go ahead, please.
In the port approach, once you are on starboard, can you take the red boat up and force them over the line?
Yes. Again, that would be the green boat coming in and the green boat turning earlier to come underneath the red boat. I assume that's the question.
Yeah, she meant the blue boat, sorry.
Oh,
can you take the green boat can force blue boat over?
Yes, they can. Yes, they can. Again, to Eric's point, you must be close hauled, which means your sails are in. They have air in them, and they're working for you. And at that point, you have to give blue boat time and room to respond. She doesn't have, by rule and by the cases, a boat that becomes burdened. This in this case would be the blue boat number 2. A boat that becomes burdened does not have to anticipate the activity of another boat. So she needs to do nothing until the rights of the green boat in this case are established. So as soon as there's an overlap, and so that means the green boat is close hauled and her rights, and she has an overlap, at that moment blue boat then must respond. And if green boat has come in early enough, yes, green can take blue up over the line, fall off and get herself, make sure that green boat is below the start line, and blue boat having to wait for green boat can be pushed over. And if the gun goes off at that moment, blue boat is over early, she must dip below the line and restart. Hope that answered the question.
Another question?
Yes, go ahead.
What if you're the blue boat? What's your tactic to defend against somebody, the green boat, coming up and getting in the hole under you?
Eric?
I can take that one. Is in that position an awful lot. So the best thing that blue can do when a boat like green is coming on port, so green 1 and port 1, they're coming at each other. The best thing that blue can do is bow down and accelerate at green before they intersect. If blue goes bow down and accelerates, green has to make a decision of what to do much sooner. They have to decide either to go behind blue or to tack much earlier. And if they tack much earlier, now that blue is accelerating, going fast, blue can go head to wind or coast very high and gap up away from green, because green has to complete her tack.
That's great. Thank you, Eric.
We have one more question.
Please.
What is the rule number that relates to a boat does not have to anticipate the actions of another boat? I don't know. They do have to anticipate, don't they?
I think that they don't, and I believe that is a part of the cases, and not it's an interpretation of the rules, not a rule itself. And I would have to look that one up.
And I believe you're right, Greg. I believe there isn't a specific rule that says you don't have to anticipate, but by the rule book, they only have rules of specific circumstances, and they only apply to when boats meet, when there's an overlap, when, windward, leeward, when a boat's tacking, that kind of thing. There's nothing in the rules about anticipating.
Yes.
And we see that a lot in match racing. There's a lot of collisions and stuff because people tack too close and the port boat doesn't have to avoid until the starboard boat is actually on starboard, which is when their close hauled sail's full.
Exactly. Are there any other questions?
Not at this time.
Thank you. So on the port approach, yeah, come in from the left side, get your speed, find your gap, turn in sheet, and look at the face on the windward, the skipper's face on the windward boat. You need to, again, you have no rights coming in on port tack, so you're kind of threading a needle. To Eric's point about if a starboard tack boat puts bow down on you, you need to go around them. You are the giveaway boat, so you don't have rights. Typically, a solid bowman who understands, who has good vision of the whole oncoming fleet, and who can clearly communicate what the skipper needs to be doing. Understand, Eric, I think, pointed out that there's you may not find a gap. If you look at some of the large fleets, you have 40, 50, 70 boats on the start line, you may not find a spot. And things are happening very quickly, so you don't have a lot of room for error. So that goes back to being able to communicate with the bowman.
We have a question.
Yes, please.
What are the rights of a boat going through a tack? Could you please speak, like, I'm going to tack below you. What are my rights?
Rights of a boat on while tacking. I think that's beyond the scope of this right now. I will say that I think it's rule 13. I'm gonna have to look it up. I could pull up my rule book. I have it handy. But generally, the boat that is tacking does not have rights until they, again, as Eric pointed out, until they're on close hauled and the sails are full.
On starboard, right?
I'm sorry?
On starboard.
Coming onto starboard, that's correct.
And I believe that goes both ways, port or starboard. A boat tacking has little to no rights at all. So if you're on starboard, or if you're on port tacking to starboard, your rights start when you've reached close hauled course. And the same if you're on starboard and someone's coming on port and you want to tack below them, you need to complete your tack onto port, be close hauled before you get the rights of being the leeward boat.
Yeah, I can give you the rule. It's rule 15 and rule 16. 15 is acquiring right of way, and as Eric pointed out, when you come on to when you acquire right of way, you must give the other boat room to keep clear. And rule 16.1 is when a right of way boat changes course, she shall give another boat room to keep clear. And 16 and 17. So 15, 16, 17 are the rules you can take a look at. Anything else?
Not at this time.
Okay. Port tack start. Eric, you want to talk about your very favorite port tack start?
I just don't, most of the sailing I do is bigger fleets and a lot of big one design. And so a port tack start is almost never possible. But again, if it is, it requires the port boat to be at full speed. I think it requires you to do a practice start, a few minutes before the actual start, to make sure when you're on port, you're sailing high enough visually across the line that you're confident that you could cross anybody that would be on starboard with a good tack. So it takes a bit of a left shift. It takes the committee boat setting the pin very favored. You'll know this if you've done the math to find the favored end. If it's 30 degrees favored, say, you know that a boat on starboard can barely even cross the line on starboard. So a port tack would work there.
Eric, would this also be a good time if the committee boat is favored and the fleet is stacking up around the signal boat? Would this be a good time to try it?
No, because if the committee boat was favored, at least one boat in the pack at the committee boat would get a good start. And if you're on port near the pin with the committee boat favored, you would never, mathematically you would never be able to cross. And so you would end up having to tack back onto starboard under the people that are on starboard. So I think that would be very high risk for me.
Great, thank you. As Eric pointed out, you're going to want to hit the pin at full speed. Make sure you're crossing the fleet, because again, port tack, you don't have rights. If there's a crowd, you may have to duck or jibe around, or you can just duck transoms and head to the right. One of the things that if you want them to jump down, if you want the right side of the course, you're going to get it. So sometimes there's a reason for that. I mean, a lot more pressure on the right-hand side. You might just want to get out there and at the cost of taking some transoms. It may pay dividends later on. You also may be pinned out there because the whole fleet will be to leeward of you. Does work better, Eric. Thank you for that. And smaller fleets, and I think maneuverable boats. It definitely pays dividends for that. Eric, would you like to talk about start line tactics? Some of the stuff we can do with this.
Absolutely. Like we've touched on before, finding a big hole and keeping it is probably the number one important thing. Most committee boats set the lines pretty even, and one end or the other is only favored by a couple of degrees. And so more often than not, simply having a good hole towards the side of the line that you want to be is important. I think it's important to remember, if one side is favored, if the committee boat's favored or the pin end is favored, it doesn't mean you have to start at the committee boat or at the pin. We often talk about the start line in quarters or thirds. If the committee boat's favored, we are very happy to start in the upper third of the starting line. So we take some of the line bias, but also give ourselves a large area to pick from to find a hole. And how we decide which quarter or which third we start in is by A, figuring out which end of the line is favored, and B, looking upwind and trying to decide which side of the course we want to go to. I often find myself actually standing, with a few minutes before the start, actually standing up on top of the cabin, about as high as you can get in the boat, and scanning the course. It's amazing with just a little bit of altitude how much you can see darker water or puffs coming down the course. On a big boat, I'll stand on the boom and try to scan the horizon and look for more wind. So I have a plan at a start, which end's favored, which quadrant of the line I want to start on find a hole in that area, and then sail towards where we think there's more wind, shift dependent, of course.
Cool. And you and Bruce are going to talk more about this next week, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Cool. Some things to watch out for. This on the rocks is just one of them. Boy, I've seen this a few times. People coming in just running the line on port. Just don't. You have no rights. Best thing that can happen is you'll be over early, and you're risking a collision. Another thing is reaching in from the right-hand side. Again, skipper not willing to get into the parade. It really is for rookies, and you don't have rights. So just don't. Got to keep both in the signal boat and the pin in sight. Again, if it's a crowded fleet, bigger boats, they'll have a bowman to do this. But the driver and tactician also really need to keep those in their eyesight. Losing track of the clock. Again, that especially for any timed start, that's a deal killer. Again, having a crewman assigned or two assigned to keep the time. And I say two because invariably somebody's watch gets bumped. It's happened to me a bunch of times. So have a couple of watches to make sure you know where you are in the sequence. And when you're anytime downwind, you're going to have disturbed air boats to weather of you. So beware that you don't have as much power in your boat as you would in the regular part of the course. If you're over early, you do need to stay clear of other boats until you're back on the pre-start side of the line. You basically lose your rights, so don't interfere with other boats. If you're over early, if you've got plenty of line in front of you, just dip down below the line, come back up. Under certain circumstances, you must go around the ends. That's a little rarer for more for dinghy racing. But remember, you can also circle the pin or the signal boat if you find yourself over early. That may be a faster solution for you than trying to get than dip below the line. Especially if there are other late starters, you won't be able to dip. Your boat must be completely on the pre-start side of the line. Again, knowing the X flag, and it will come down once you are cleared. Do be aware that you may not be the boat the race committee signaled out, and you think you were over early. You're feeling guilty, so you go back and try to restart. You dip below the line, X flag stays up, and you think, what the heck, did I not clear? And it may not be for you, but so you really have to be clear again on where is the line, and make sure your entire boat is below that, and put a couple of feet in the bank just to make sure you know that you have properly cleared.
We have a question.
Yes, please.
Is the committee obligated to dip the flag for you?
The committee will take the X flag down when the last boat that was called over early, and there may be more than one. When the last boat has cleared, they will bring the X flag down. So again, if you've got 2 or 3 boats over, you can dip below the line. You have to be, just as I say, put a couple of feet in the bank to make sure that, yes, my entire boat and all of its equipment in its normal operating position has come below the line, and you're exonerated. It's somebody else.
Another question?
To reaffirm what Greg is saying, a committee will not dip the flag for an individual person returning if other boats are still over.
Exactly.
Another question?
Yes, please.
If you think you're over but not sure, can you hail the committee boat if you don't get on the radio, if they don't broadcast?
I have been very close to the line in big fleets, and the committee boats calling many numbers, and I have gotten on the radio and asked them to repeat them or asked for the sail number. Sometimes a race committee will repeat it, but they are not obligated to. So it doesn't hurt to ask.
On the other side of that, the committee has got their hands full. They're literally taking names and numbers, and also that they may be preparing for the next start, particularly if it's a rolling 5-minute start. Once the first fleet's gun has gone off, the committee's head is in the next start. So they may not have time to get there, to pull out a radio and say, yes, XYZ boat, you are cleared. We just may not have the time. So the best thing is again, it's the old, what you can see is what you need to do. So you need to be responsible for saying, yes, I can see my boat is below, has dipped completely below the line, and I am exonerated. So, but as Eric points out, it doesn't hurt to ask. If you're the last start, the committee may have a free hand, and they can say, yeah, you're fine, or no, you didn't clear. So, so a couple of things. I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier. If you're coming into the pin end and you just don't fetch the pin, you just get blown down on a breezy day. That can happen, or if someone's on top of you for whatever reason, you can just jibe out. You can just jibe around, make a big left turn, and then go back out and start on port. It also works if you come up short of the weather mark. If you a lot of I know Buddy Mel just points out that if you aren't over early about once a season, twice a season, you're not aggressive enough. So take a risk, maybe on push the envelope a little bit, particularly on races that aren't the national championship. If you do foul a boat, you need to exonerate with 2 turns. That's Rule 44.1. And the sailing instructions may amend this, but you do need to, if you foul someone, do your turns. Don't go to the room. Dennis Conner points out you've got a 50-50 chance of winning, regardless of how much in the right you think you are. So just if you think you fouled someone, do your turns, get on with the race. And just a reminder that a penalty turn is defined as 1 tack and 1 jibe. Eric, you got some pro tips for us.
Absolutely.
Right.
For us, success is just all about preparation in between races. It's not really much time for us to eat and drink. Well, we do like to get hydrated, but we try to use that time to prepare for the next start. 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 7 minutes before the start of each and every race that we do, no matter how many races they're doing in a day, we like to go upwind and start recording again the new headings on port and starboard. This tells us what our headings will be off the start line, and it also tells us what the true wind direction is and helps us track what the true wind is doing. And while the tactician is doing all of that math and recording all those numbers, it's a good time simultaneously for the trimmers to check their trim on the main, on the jib leads, jib halyard tension, Cunningham, outhaul on the main, all that kind of stuff, so that your sails are set up in the condition that you're going to start in, or as close to it as you can get. And then we come back after going upwind for, it just takes a couple of minutes, it takes like 2 minutes, 1 minute on port, 1 minute on starboard, doesn't take long. And then we like to come back and just, even when our sequence starts, we try to do a practice start. This helps the tactician get into a rhythm. It helps him get his time and distance. Like Greg said earlier, how long is it going to take to get from point A to point B? And at the same time, simultaneously, we're working very efficiently. The trimmers at that time can work on how to trim the sails to best accelerate the boat. Are they full enough? Are they, is the boat powered up enough so that when the start comes just minutes later, you're as practiced as you can be. One more tip, always eat lunch on starboard. That way, I can't tell you how many boats I've seen collide while people are just milling around between the starts, eating and drinking. You may as well be on starboard so the other boat has to pay for it.
That's great. One other thing, just for any of the crew, especially in Marina del Rey, well, there's a lot of kelp. Up in Seattle, we used to have logs and stuff that's fallen off of container boats. When any of the crew sees something that needs to be at the attention of the skipper, call it out. Don't say, hey, look out for that kelp. Say, we have kelp, 10 o'clock, 40 yards. So that gives them where to look, and and distance tells them how much time they have to react. Eric, I'm sure you've seen a lot of times, I'm sure a lot of people have seen, someone will call out, oh my gosh, look out for the kelp, and the helmsman will come up or fall off hard, and 2 degrees would have done it. So it's a costly miscommunication. So distance and bearing when you're pointing something out. Eric, what do the pros do?
So to back up just a little bit about what I was saying a little bit earlier, before the starts, the tactician gets port and starboard headings. The nice thing about getting this, 1 minute on port, 1 minute on starboard, and writing those headings down is you can compare them to the previous race's headings or earlier in the morning's headings, and it really will start painting a clear picture for you if the wind is going right or oscillating, going left, going back and forth, going one direction and staying, and wind speeds going up and down. The trimmers need to know this. It helps them set their sails, set all their sail settings. Most of the boats I sail on, everything is marked really well. So we have numbers for pretty much everything. Even outhaul in Cunningham, we have numbers for. So if we're going upwind, the Cunningham's at 4 and the outhaul's at 3, right before the start, if we sense that the wind speed is going up or down, we can adjust something very, very accurately. That's one of the biggest things we do, is everything is marked really well, and we have a really good sense of where the settings need to be for a given wind speed or sea state even. We are constantly checking the wind direction. Even after we go upwind and do port and starboard headings, once a minute, we will do a head to wind, as long as we're in clean air somewhere on the start line, and write the new number down. I can't tell you how many times we've found, the wind's shifting drastically just minutes before the start. Maybe we did our head to wind at the pin end and we found that the pin end was favored, or we did the math and we found that the pin was 15 degrees favored. And 1 minute before the start, there's a 15 or 16, 17, 18 degree right-hand shift. It happens. I've seen it happen, and it's not that uncommon. So doing head to winds and getting new wind direction numbers are quite important. And that's where getting the angle on the line via math is important. knowing that the line is square to, say, 250 is important. That way, no matter where you are in your start sequence, you can go head to wind and get a wind direction number and be able to do the actual math on how much it's favored. Because like somebody asked earlier, maybe 15 degrees is enough to sway where you want to start, but maybe 2 degrees isn't. Maybe 2 degrees isn't enough to change your mind on where you want to start. It's still more important to go find, more wind, to sail upwind where there's more wind on the course.
I have a question.
Practice starts. Yep.
Typically in Marina del Rey, the wind oscillates. So if you are checking your wind headings and you're seeing every 10 minutes the wind is oscillating 5 degrees, would you play to the oscillation, or would you start where you are right at that time?
If the line was only favored on one side by 1 or 2 degrees, or say under 5 degrees, I think sailing to the oscillations is a good idea. We make it a habit, make it a point of being at our starting area 1 hour before the start. I am generally at the starting area before the race committee is. And one of the reasons for that, not only to get our practice in, but it's so that we can start recording the wind direction numbers on the course. And so if you're there for an hour and you write down a number every 3 minutes, every 5 minutes, by the time you start an hour later, I think you will have a clear indication of what you just asked in the questions. Is it oscillating back and forth? How often? How much? And that sort of thing. So, like, to answer your question, I think if it is oscillating and you're pretty confident it's oscillating, you can start, your start practice can be based on the oscillation. You could, if it's going from 5 degrees boat favored to 3 degrees pin favored, and at the start, maybe it's slightly boat favored, but you know that the wind's going to go left, I don't think it's very risky to start down by the pin and be set up for the left-hand shift.
Thank you.
I'd like to just mention, Eric talked about marking your lines and to have for the various power settings. Eric has an article on Sailing World about marking lines. And Eric, I mentioned this, but I sent the link to it to our crew just because I thought it was something that we don't do and we've had some trouble with. So thank you for writing that, and I encourage everybody else to take a look at that. Something else I just sort of over time, Eric mentioned getting out on the course about an hour early, and I'll tell you something. If you notice that Eric wins a lot, an hour early is probably before most people. Eric, wouldn't you say you're typically one of the first ones on the race course?
Our goal, whether we are sailing in a 10-boat local fleet or Miami with 70 J70s like we were not long ago, we are often one of the first 4 or 5 boats on the race course, and we're almost always there before the race committee has an anchor down.
And is it fair to say that that if you look at the first 3 or 4 boats on the race course that day, that you're probably going to see at least one of those boats on the podium at the end of the regatta?
100% without fail. What I think an important to remember is that we all do this sport because we love it. We have fun doing it. It's great. It makes us better. We get to meet people. There's so many benefits. And for me, if everyone's at the dock and you're just sitting around with nothing to do, you may as well go out and get on the water and do what we love that much sooner.
Terrific. Denise, are there any other questions that have come in? Denise?
Sorry, I didn't unmute myself. One of the questions was, could you please post the link to that article, Greg? And then the other question we have from Vincent, when green boat is tacking to starboard under the blue boat, green boat must complete the tack, but can green pinch really hard to the point of stalling no higher than close halt.
Absolutely. Once green has established that their tack by being close hauled and then established that they are the lured boat, they can go all the way head to wind. They can luff everything as long as they don't cross head to wind and as long as they give blue enough room and opportunity to avoid them.
I see somebody has posted the link to that article that Eric wrote in the chat, so you can pick it up there, people. Thank you, Bert.
Fantastic. There are many articles on there. That link will probably get you there. If that doesn't work, you can go to the sailingworld.com website and search Champagne or Eric Champagne. It'll take you to a long list of articles. And a lot of them are about boat prep and making things and practice and experiences I've had. So absolutely check them out. There's a lot of great stuff there.
Yeah, definitely do that. Let's see, what else we have here? So I guess that's all we have for today. Go get them. If anybody has any questions or would like a copy of this, you can just send me an email at the what's on the screen, and I'll be happy to send you a copy of this this presentation. Are there any other final questions?
I can add just if I can just add one or two small things, Greg. You had touched on a little bit of this earlier about having sailing instructions on board, multiple sailing instructions and things like that. On that, most classes and the current rules allow you to have cell phones on board. It's not outside information if it's available to everybody. So public websites are generally are good and legal to use. I make it mandatory. Every boat I sail on has at least one cell phone. And not only because you can go online and check sailing instructions if you're on a Martin and it's windy and everything's getting wet and you can't read the sailing instructions anymore, whatever it is, but also it is the best thing if there's an emergency. If somebody gets hurt, a cell phone is going to get you help a little quicker than calling the committee boat and having them then coordinate. That also is important to let the committee boat know what's going on, but having your own personal cell phone on board will get you emergency help quicker than anything.
You can also use channel 16 on your VHF radio, on your handheld.
Absolutely.
That'll get you
and last but not least for me, while we're all, you can do practice starts on Virtual Regatta. It's a website. I don't know how many people worldwide are playing it now. It's obviously becoming very popular. I'm addicted to it. But Virtual Regatta is a great place to practice sailing, practice starts, also meet people. There's, like I said, thousands and thousands and thousands of people sailing worldwide, and actually major regattas being held at virtualregatta.com.
Cool. Great stuff.
Awesome, guys. Thank you so much.
I'm glad everybody was here. Eric, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll look forward to seeing you and Bruce next week and
I'll
more
be
good
there.
information.
Yes, absolutely. Next week, Bruce Cooper and Eric Champagne will be talking. We'll be presenting the Advanced Start Clinic. I know I'm going to be there, so I hope all you guys can make it as well.
There will be a new login, and we will require registration again, so that we're not getting hacked. So. Please, you've already signed up on the JOT form for the 11th. You will get the new login. If you want to tell your friends, it'll be posted. You can send them the JOT form link, and then they will get a link to log into Zoom, and Zoom will send them a link to this program. And that's the way we avoid seeing pornography.
Amongst other things.
Great stuff.
And I just want to thank everybody for attending. I want to thank our presenters, Greg Rudder and Eric Champagne, Denise George, and behind the scenes we have Marion Smith and also Steve Potter helping us out. So also, I just wanted to say one thing. There was a lot of, I think, great questions. It seemed as though the people who were asking questions were experienced. If you're still with us and you had some questions that you didn't feel as though you, maybe they seemed too simple, or there's no simple question, if you want to just include them in the chat and maybe we can get them back to you kind of right away, that might be another way for us to include everybody. And also just to talk about race committee and the involvement of getting involved in your club, or perhaps getting more information about our club. It's a great way to learn a lot more about the start as well. From a bird's eye view, get a sense of what the line looks like, who's over early, how many people are on time, and all those kind of things. So I encourage you to do all that. So once again, thanks so much, folks, for attending, and we'll hopefully see you all next week.
Good stuff.
Bye, everybody. You hit the
Our
leave meeting.
organizers just hang out for a minute.
Sure. You can hit the leave meeting. On the, yeah.
Yes, if you want to leave, you can hit leave meeting. If you want to stay and just do some more chatting, we're here.
We're just going to do a wrap up, I guess, right?
Yeah, I'm going to stop recording.
Okay.